Welcome to Extraterrestrial Reality. Can you imagine if you walked out of your house one day into a nearby woods to go deer hunting, and you walk into the woods and all of a sudden you notice it's real dark, shadowy for some reason, and then you look up and right above the canopy of the trees you see some giant object hovering. Imagine. That's exactly what happened to Ricky Sorrells one day back in December of 2007 in Stephenville, or actually in Dublin, Texas, near Stephenville, Texas. He walked out of his front door with his rifle, with a scope on it, walked into the woods, realized that there was something wrong about the whole situation, and when he looked up, he saw this giant object about a mile across, gigantic, just hovering there silently, 300 feet above the ground. He couldn't even see the edges of it. He was looking in like above the canopy of the trees. It was only like 300 feet off the ground. And can you imagine? Imagine looking up through the canopy of the trees and seeing a giant object just hovering above the tree canopy. Imagine, that's what Ricky Sorrells saw. And then he was threatened to shut up about it and not talk about it. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how the United States military, as well as militaries across the world, are basically cucked by this alien presence. And that's why they don't want to, that's one of the biggest reasons why they don't want to talk about it, because they know they're outclassed, they're outmatched, and the technology that they're up against just exceeds by who knows how many points anything that we've developed. I mean, we don't have anything like what Ricky Sorrells saw. And then he said when he was watching this thing, it took off at a 45-degree angle, unbelievably fast. If he would have blinked his eyes, he said it would have seemed like it disappeared, but it just took off on this 45-degree angle extremely fast, and it was gone. A lot of people saw this in the Stephenville area, in that Stephenville, Dublin area during those months, late 2007, early 2008. But could you imagine looking up at the top of the trees and seeing floating above them just some silent object just completely blocking out the sky? That's what Ricky Sorrells said he saw. Imagine that. I mean, that's beyond anything that we could create. And you have to ask yourself questions like, okay, why then? Why? You have to ask yourself questions like, why? Why would the government tell Ricky Sorrells, among other people over the decades, to keep quiet about what they saw? Well, it's pretty easy, because they don't want people to know, the government, the military, doesn't want people to know what is going on. They know that we're not a match to this. That's why one of the biggest reasons to keep this quiet is because how are they going to say we're safe from this when they don't even know what they're up to? But there's more to it than that, and we're going to talk about that today in today's episode. There's more to it, I believe, than just the questions that they won't be able to answer. There's a lot more to it than that. I think sometimes what's going on is these beings are sending out a message. They weren't sending a message to Ricky Sorrells or any of the other witnesses in the Stephenville area like Steve Allen. They were sending a message to the military like, hey, don't get too big for your britches, because look what we got, and you're no match. That's what it could be. Anyway, that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay, now we're back in the comfort of my office here, and after the little sojourn there into the Pennsylvania woods to start us off for today's episode, I guess we're going to start with the 1997 Phoenix Lights incident. Of course, maybe 1,000 people, give or take, saw objects in the sky in the Phoenix and Arizona area back in March of 1997. Giant object, a giant triangular-shaped object or a boomerang-shaped object. And then later on, the military, along with a bunch of moron debunkers, came out and said, no, all that was part of this Operation Snowbird, which was a pilot training program, and there was just what people were seeing were A-10 Thunderbolts 2 aircraft flying around, or in one instance, and in another instance they saw flares. Flares were getting dropped, and that's what people mistook for a giant object floating through the sky. Of course, that was all a lie, because the military doesn't want to admit to what really was in the sky in the Phoenix area back in 1997. And the debunkers hate this, because then, I mean, this is like an inconvenient reality to them, and so they get on board with all the excuses that the military throws out. And if you go to Wikipedia, for instance, and read about this, about the Phoenix Lights incident, you'll see that there's a lot of digital ink given to the debunkers here, like people like a longtime moron James McGaha, also a longtime idiot Robert Schaefer. These two guys have been lying about UFOs and aliens their entire lives, it seems, and they, for some reason, Wikipedia loves these people. As we all know, Wikipedia, the pages that deal with UFOs and alien encounters, they're controlled by this group of skeptics called Guerrilla Skepticism of Wikipedia, and they don't want people to know the truth either, because they hate it. They think they're really smart, but really they're stupid, and they don't want to face reality. And they just make stories up and lie to people, just like the government does, just like the military for all these decades. They continue to lie to people about the reality of the situation. But here's what I think happened, like with regard to the Phoenix Lights incident, for instance. So what I believe might be the case here with this case, and as well as with the Stephenville incident years later, I think what happens sometimes is that these beings they're trying to make a statement, not to the denizens, not to the regular citizens of this world, but to the militaries of the world, particularly in this case in Arizona, the United States military, obviously, and then later on the Stephenville incident as well. I believe that they're sending a message out, not to the people. They're letting people, regular old citizens, see these giant craft floating around, and then there's a big hoopla about it, and of course it's going to reach the ears of the military, and the military, what are they going to do? It was flares. We were dropping flares. That's all it was. We were doing a training mission. People just saw jets flying in formation. No more questions. Listen to Robert Schaefer. He'll tell you everything you need to know. He'll debrief you on this whole incident, and you'll find that it was absolutely nothing, and that these people are all a bunch of idiots, and they didn't really see what they thought they saw. To take it from us, right? So that's basically what they do. But really, what I think is happening is that over the years, I mean, I would imagine that there are times when we try to shoot these objects down, and we're probably successful in doing so. I would imagine sometimes. There's been stories like this where there's been attempts to shoot them down. I don't think they do this all the time, but I think that they do it on occasion. They try to shoot these UFOs down, and then they try to retrieve them, and then they try to reverse engineer them. And maybe that's what was going on back in 1997. Maybe the aliens themselves were sending a message to the military saying, hey, you better stop what you're doing. Whatever they're doing, we don't know what they're doing, but the aliens probably have a better idea what the military's trying to do than the regular people out there. And so they're trying to send a message to the military, say, hey, look if you want to play games with us, well, guess what? We'll look what we can do. And I think that's probably what happened with the Phoenix incident, as well as the Stephenville incident from 2007, 2008. And the military, what are they going to do? All they could do is try to intimidate the witnesses and tell them they didn't really see what they thought they saw, or to try to ridicule them. But the bottom line is that a lot of people saw this giant thing flying around the Phoenix area and Arizona area back in 1997, including Fife Symington, the governor. Of course, as we all know, he tried to make fun of the whole situation in 1997 when he had that press conference and he brought out the fake alien. But then 10 years later, in 2007, he told a UFO investigator that he actually saw the craft himself. And here was a quote from Symington. He says, he didn't want to say anything because he didn't want to panic the populace. According to Symington, I'm a pilot and I know just about every machine that flies. It was bigger than anything I've ever seen. It remains a great mystery. Other people saw it, responsible people. I don't know why people would ridicule it. Well, the reason it gets ridiculed because, for one thing, the debunkers, their whole world will come it should already be, it's already over for the debunkers. I mean, some of them don't know it yet, right? We already have the absolute proof, as we've been talking about on the show. We know for a fact, right, there are creatures here. We
have the proof. We have the absolute proof, right? So their world is, they don't like this. That this goes against everything that they've been talking about their whole lives. So they're going to go along with the military on this because they don't want it to be true, because then they're going to look like dumb fools, like they really are. Everyone will see them. The emperor will have no clothes now because everyone sees that these people are a bunch of liars and hucksters. So, and then meanwhile, the military doesn't want to admit to this, because then they would be admitting to the fact that they're no match. They're no match to this, and so they'd rather pretend that it doesn't exist. That's why the Air Force doesn't want to investigate anymore, because there's absolutely nothing they can do. They want to pretend that there's nothing to it, even though the secret control group will study it secretly. But overall, right, the military, they take the stance that there's nothing to it. We never found anything out about it. UFOs, it's not real. There's no such thing as aliens, and so on and so forth, because they don't want people to be thinking about this. They don't want to know. They don't want people to know that there are giant motherships on this planet operated by these creatures. And so, I think that's what could be the case here. I think what's going on here is that these beings are sending out a message, and I think that's what happened in Phoenixville back in 2007, 2008 as well. In fact, I took some notes here. I'm going to go to these notes. It was actually January 8th, 2008. Steve Allen, he was a pilot and a freight company owner, and he was sitting around at a campfire with some of his buddies. He says, all of a sudden, I see some real bright, high-intensity light off to the east, headed our way at a high velocity of speed. The lights were so bright it was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was almost blinding to look at them, said Allen. Then what amazed me is there was no wind noise, no engine noise. There was silence. When it came past us, I developed the most peaceful, easy feeling I think I've ever had in my life. It was almost like a religious experience, like I was at one with whatever it was, something I've never had before or since then. It was unreal. People wonder what in the world it is, because this is the Bible Belt and everyone is afraid it's the end of times. It was positively, absolutely nothing from these parts. Now, you'd have to say that Steve Allen, this guy's a pilot. I mean, if you've seen him he's been interviewed on shows like CNN, and also he appeared in some documentaries. There was a documentary series on Netflix a couple of years ago in 2023 where they talked about this case. And Steve Allen, this guy's a credible witness, and it was him. There was actually around 100 people that saw this, including the local police constable. He got a load of this object. He just saw the lights. He saw a number of lights that were moving in unison, and he thought that they're all part of a single object. And then, of course, there was Ricky Sorrell, a machinist, who in late December, he saw this object in broad daylight. And his encounter was probably the most spectacular because it was only 300 feet off the ground. And there's a picture of Ricky right there. He appeared on CNN a few times back in 2008. When this was a big story, there was a show up where he was talking about this, and here was from an article from 2008 where he was talking about what he encountered. It said, machinist Ricky Sorrell said friends made fun of him when he told them he saw a flat metallic object hovering about 300 feet over a pasture behind his Dublin, Texas home, but he decided to come forward after reading similar accounts in the Stephenville Empire Tribune. You hear about some big bass or big buck in the area, but this is a different deal, Sorrell said. It feels good to hear that other people saw something because that means I'm not crazy. Sorrell said he had seen the object several times. He said he watched it through his rifle's telescopic lens and described it as very large and without seams, nuts, or bolts. And then it says here, this Major Carl Lewis, a spokesman for the 301st Fighter Wing at the Joint Reserve Base Naval Air Station in Fort Worth, said no F-16s or other aircraft from his base were in the area the night of January 8th, when most people reported the sighting. Lewis said the object may have been an illusion caused by two commercial airplanes. Lights from the aircraft would seem unusually bright and may appear orange from the setting sun. I'm 90% sure this was an airliner, Lewis said. With the sun's angle, it can play tricks on you. Now, of course, how could anybody believe this guy from this Major Carl Lewis? Like, the guy's lying to you. There's 100 witnesses, right? Ricky Sorrell saw this thing in broad daylight, right? And then he was threatened. He was intimidated. At one point, he went out to his vehicle and get into his truck, and there was a bullet sitting on the dash of his vehicle. He doesn't know how it got there. And actually, he told CNN back in 2008 that he not only that, he actually looked at the object through a scope of his gun. Now, he didn't tell this to CNN, but he did tell it to Steve Allen that at one point when he was looking through the scope of his gun, he actually saw what looked like a praying mantis alien looking down at him. And he didn't talk about that on TV. I'm assuming he was probably afraid to bring that up because he was afraid that people would think he was nuts. Because that's the stigma that surrounds this whole phenomenon that's been created. It's understandable. But anyway, he was talking to Larry King back in 2008 about this, and he said that the thing that he saw was huge. It was so big that I couldn't see the edges through the canopy of the trees. I couldn't see past it. I started looking at it, all the details. There wasn't no bolts, no rivets, no welded seams. It was smooth. It was like a barn gray, a sandy gray. And it also had these cones protruding, going up into it. It looked like cones protruding into it. Bigger at the bottom, going up to a smaller at the top. And then it took off at this 45-degree angle, very silently, absolutely no sound. And it scared, it freaked him out. And then he was talking about this in the military. He was getting phone calls of people who were showing up at his house. He said he had the military coming down on him. And it was an awful lot to take in at one point, a whole lot of issues surrounding it. It was a pretty big ordeal for me. And Larry King asked him, well, what do you think it was, Ricky? And Sorrell says, I don't know. I can say this. If it was our military, we can sleep good at night. But if it's not our military, we're in trouble. It was pretty huge, pretty big. And then Larry King had asked him, how did the military come down on him? And he says, he goes, I believe it was the military. I had helicopters coming over my place here in a grid pattern. I had a guy show up at 1 a.m. I looked at him through the door, and I had a lieutenant colonel, who I believe it was, this is what he told me on the phone, call me, and, he wanted to come interview me. We had a heated discussion when I told him no, and I asked him if he would quit flying his helicopters over my airspace. That's when he informed me it wasn't my airspace, it was his. But we went ahead and, he told me that if, I would sort of kind of quiet down, that he would not fly his helicopters over. And, I've remained pretty quiet up until now, and the helicopters have quit flying over us. So basically, there was helicopters that were flying over his property, and then he gets called by this lieutenant colonel from the Air Force, apparently, and he says he'll stop flying helicopters over his property if he stops talking about what he saw publicly. Like, now why? You have to ask yourself a question. This is the question. This is the $1 million question. Why did military officials intimidate Ricky Sorrells? Why? You have to ask yourself that question. If he didn't see anything, right, why would the military officials intimidate him? That's because he did see something, and they didn't want him talking about it. That's why. If they would not have, because Ricky Sorrells was a very, very credible, believable person. That's why. He didn't make this up. None of those people in Stephenville and the Dublin area who saw this giant object in 2007 and 2008 were making anything up. The military just doesn't want people to know that they're completely outclassed, outmanned, out everything when it comes to these creatures. That's what it comes down to. They're basically, they're like cuckolds. That's what they are when it comes to this. And that's one of the biggest reasons why they don't want to talk about it. They're doing the reverse engineering secretly, and the crash retrievals, all that's being done secretly. But meanwhile, one of the other concerns is they've been lying for all these decades, and on top of it, they have no answers. I mean, what kind of possible potential answer could you possibly have when you're talking about a craft that's a mile wide, that could be that big and that could move around with absolutely no sound like that? What could you possibly tell the public? So what they do instead is they intimidate you when you see something like this. That's what it comes down to. And I think that one of the reasons why these aliens are doing stuff like this is because they're sending a message not to people like Ricky Sorrells or Steve Allen or anybody, or Fife Symington in Phoenix. They're not sending messages to those people. They're sending messages to the military that, hey, they're just giving them a little reminder. Say, hey, look at what we got. You better look out, buddy. Better watch yourself. Don't get too big for your britches. I think that's what it is. I think that they send these creatures at some points, they're sending out messages, and those messages are to militaries of the world saying, hey, look out, buddy, because look, we're here, we're not going anywhere, and we got better technology than you, and whatever you're doing, they might be doing something behind the scenes that we don't know about. Like, for instance, maybe they're shooting them down sometimes, and these creatures know this, and they're sick of it, and they're, okay, you want to play that game? Okay, we're gonna take one of our motherships and fly it around Stephenville, Texas, and this is warning number 1 or warning number 2 or whatever. I mean, that's what it could be. It's sending a message out. That's what they're doing, I believe. Possibly. It doesn't make me right. It's just a theory. But obviously the military is this is way above its pay grade, I believe, all of this. And that's one of the reasons why they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about it because this is, what are they going to tell? How are they going to tell? What are they going to tell people? How are they going to explain it to the world? Yeah, it's they're not here to harm us. Well, how do you know that? There's be so many different questions that would, once you admit the reality of the situation, then there's going to be so many other questions, and they're just not going to have answers for them. And so that's why they would rather intimidate people like Ricky Sorrells or whoever else encounters these bigger craft like this. And if you're a credible person and you have no reason to be telling lies, and there's a whole bunch of other witnesses to go along with it, right? So the best course of action for the military is to stigmatize these people, ridicule them if possible, intimidate them if they won't listen. And Ricky Sorrells, he's not talked about this now. He's quiet. In fact, he didn't. From that Netflix documentary where they talked about this case from a couple of years ago, he did not appear in it. Let me just pull. I have an article with regard to that documentary. I'll pull it up right here. Yeah, it was, the documentary series was called Messengers. It was a 4-part series, and I did do a couple of episodes about that. And anyway, here's an article that appeared in Vice a couple of years ago with regard to that episode. It says, Stephenville is often referred to by locals as the milk capital of the world. But after the events of January 2008, the Texas town of Stephenville became known for something otherworldly. In Messengers, the first episode of Vice Studios and Netflix's new series Encounters, residents of Stephenville and the surrounding area, which includes Dublin, recount seeing something strange in the sky. One witness called it an orb. Another referred to it as a flying Dorito. Yes, as in the three-sided tortilla chip. But even with such wild descriptions, the so-called Stephenville Lights is considered one of the most credible UFO sightings in modern times. Of course it's credible. It's one of the most credible, because like the Phoenix Lights incident, there was probably at least 100 witnesses, right? I mean, how many people probably saw what Ricky Sorrells saw and didn't even say anything about it for fear of ridicule? You have to ask yourself that question too. Anyway, it says here, it began when Steve Allen and a couple of friends were enjoying a few beers by a campfire one night and something caught their eye. And then that's when he had that. I already read his quote from what he saw. And then as soon as the object disappeared, it took off that they saw. A few minutes later, Allen said he saw F-16s trailing behind it in hot pursuit. And he was wondering if it's, what is this, War of the Worlds? What's going on? A few miles west, local police constable Leroy Gayton was on his way to rent a movie for his wife's birthday when something caught his attention. I saw what appeared. I call it a bubble or an orb. It was a reddish-orange, fiery-looking color, really big, he said. It was these bright lights flashing like a pulsating thing, like that. They had spread out. There was 11 or 12 lights that I was able to count. All of a sudden, these things just shoot off at a blazing speed. Shortly after, he saw jet fighters chasing after it too. So there was another witness there, 2 very credible witnesses, a pilot and a local constable, amongst many other people in that area that saw this giant object floating around. And then, of course, we get told lies by the military about what it is. Just flights, just airplane. We were doing training, stuff like that. And don't worry about, these people were just seeing things. It was a hallucination, blah, blah, blah. Same old, all the time, every year, every decade. That doesn't change. We just get lied to by our officials. And actually, another interesting thing about the Stephenville case was that it was captured on radar. Whatever this object was seen on radar. What's unique about the Stephenville sighting, said Robert Powell, a nanotechnology engineer and UFO investigator, is the accompanying radar information that appears to corroborate the sighting of Allen and Gayton. Via Freedom of Information Act requests, Powell received primary radar data from 5 different antennas in the region from the FAA. With that information, Powell explained that he first tracked down the routes of the 2 F-16s, which had transponders because they are government aircrafts. So once I identified where the F-16s were, I went to start looking for objects that did not have transponders, he said. What I find is radar data that confirms what Steve Allen and Leroy Gayton have told me. There are 2 radar points that showed an object moving without a transponder. The 2 data points match the time and the geographical location of Steve Allen's sighting, he said. This is outside of the military operating area, so it should have a transponder if it is a military aircraft, but it doesn't. So And there's more to this article. I'll leave the link so you can check it out for yourself. But obviously, as you see, not only was the object in Stephenville that was spotted on January 8th caught on radar, and you have multiple witnesses to it. Of course, we get lied to by the military. They don't know what's going on. They have no answers. They don't investigate UFOs anymore, which is really, really funny when you really think about it. I mean, again, think about this. Okay, say some objects are flying, all of a sudden we don't know what they are, and they're flying over Washington, D.C., right? Circular, ovoid-shaped, silent objects all of a sudden appear over Washington, D.C., over the Capitol. They're all just floating above the Capitol building. And somebody calls the Air Force. The Air Force isn't going to investigate. They're not going to investigate. Oh, we don't look into that stuff anymore. We just let it sit there and do nothing. This is all a big, giant facade, and everyone in this country and across the world, for the most part, is being led around by the nostrils by a bunch of people who just don't want you to know about the reality of the world in which you live. And the people who don't want you to know are these people who are part of the secret control group and there's certain people within the military for whatever reason, and then you have a bunch of debunkers who hate this whole concept of not being alone. They don't like it. They want to be alone. They don't want to believe in anything, and they just want to continue making their living by telling lies. So there's certain people out there that don't want us to know the truth, don't want the world to face up to the reality of the world in which we live, and because there's nothing they can do. They can't control it. This is beyond their control. That's what it is. When you're talking about craft that is this large, right? This is definitely, most certainly beyond our control. Craft that could move around and at speed, incredible speeds, and no sound whatsoever. Think about it. We'd be no match to whatever they have here. We're no match. And that's why the government, the military doesn't want to admit to it. They'd rather intimidate people that see these things instead. So I just wanted to point that out today. Anyway, I want to say thank you all for joining me today. Until next time.